Hey gang, this is Mrs. Klein and Miss Burkholtz. We are here today with your podcast for lesson 4, the development of feudalism in Western Europe. Today, the guiding question for you is, how well did feudalism establish order in Europe in the Middle Ages? As always, if you want to follow along in your history book, you can open up to page 53. We also have, besides that guiding question, we also have vocabulary. And this time around, the vocabulary terms are Charlemagne, chivalry, feudalism, fief, and serf. All right, let's start with the introduction.
So the collapse of the Roman Empire in 476 CE marks the beginning of the period in Europe known as the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages began with the fall of the Roman Empire, which had unified much of Europe for about 500 years. After its collapse, life became dangerous and difficult in Western Europe.
All right, these challenges gave rise to the economic and political system historians called feudalism, in which people had clearly defined roles and relationships with each other. In the feudal system, people pledged loyalty to a lord, a ruler, or a powerful landowner. In return, they received protection from that lord. Warriors fought on behalf of their lords, and peasants worked the land. And at the bottom of the system were serfs, or peasants, who were not free to leave the lord's land without permission.
Section 1, Western Europe during the early Middle Ages. When Rome fell to invading barbarians in 476 CE, Europe was left with no central government or system of defense. One powerful group during this time was the Franks.
Franks.
From whom modern-day France takes its name.
All right. In 481 CE, at the age of 15, a guy by the name of Clovis became leader of the Franks. Clovis also helped to convert the Franks to Christianity, so then they're spreading Christianity around. All right. The most important leader of the Franks, however, was Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great.
He encouraged education and scholarship, making his court a center of culture. Most important, he unified nearly all the Christian lands of Europe into a single empire.
You know what's really kind of interesting, you guys, is he encourages education and scholarship, but historians believe that he was illiterate, that he didn't know how to read and write, yet he was really, really big on encouraging other people to get an education. All right, so the weak rulers who followed Charlemagne could not defend the empire against new waves of invasion. Okay, and in the 9th and 10th centuries, Western Europe was threatened by 3 main groups: Muslims, the Magyars, and Vikings.
The Vikings were fierce warriors who instilled fear in the people of Europe. To protect themselves and their property, they gradually developed the system we call feudalism.
All right, so by the High Middle Ages, about 1000 CE, Europeans had developed the system of feudalism. Feudalism provided people with protection and safety by establishing a stable social order.
The king kept some land for himself and gave fiefs, or land grants, to his most important lords, who became his vassals. In return, each lord promised to supply the king with knights in times of war.
All right, at the bottom of the social system were peasants. Lords rented some of their land to the peasants who worked for them. However, some peasants called serfs were tied to the land they worked, which meant that they could not leave the lord's land without permission and had to farm his fields in exchange for a small plot of their own.
During the Middle Ages, people were born into a social class for life.
So you couldn't move up or down. Whatever it was, if I was born a serf, I'm going to die a serf. That's kind of how it worked.
So at the very top of feudal society were the monarchs, or kings and queens. In some places, especially during the Middle Ages, great lords grew very powerful and governed their fiefs as independent states.
In England, monarchs became quite strong during the Middle Ages. And when William of Normandy conquered England, he brought feudal institutions from Europe with him. Supported by feudalism, strong rulers finally brought order to England.
Lords and ladies during feudal times. Like monarchs, lords and ladies were members of the nobility, the highest ranking class in medieval society. Most of them lived on manors. The manor house was the center of the community, and in times of trouble, villagers entered its walls for protection.
All right, kings and queens, high-ranking nobles, and wealthy lords lived in even grander structures, castles. One of their main functions was to serve as a home. And with their moats, strong walls, and gates, they were also built for defense.
It was the lord's responsibility to manage and defend his land and his laborers. Lords also acted as judges in manor courts and had the power to fine and punish those who broke the law. In times of war, lords fought for their own higher-ranking lords, or at least supplied them with a well-trained fighting force.
It was quite common in the Middle Ages for noble women to hold fiefs and inherit land. So actually, ladies got the chance to be able to kind of have a little bit of power and control. Ladies were also responsible for overseeing their households. Although nobles and monarchs had the most privileged lives in medieval times, they were not always easy or comfortable.
Diseases affected the rich as well as the poor, and of course, warfare was a great and ever present danger.
All right, moving on to the knights during feudal times, you guys. All right, knights were the mounted soldiers of the medieval world. The path to becoming a knight involved many years of training.
During this first stage of training, a page spent much of his time with the ladies of the castle and was expected to help them in every way possible.
After about 7 years as a page, a young boy became a squire. Most importantly, squires trained to become warriors.
So, in his early 20s, if deserving of the honor, a squire would become a knight, a process that at times was a complex religious event. Knights lived by a strong code of behavior called chivalry.
All right, jousts and tournaments were a major part of a knight's life. Knights also fought wearing heavy suits of armor, and knights were only a small group in medieval society, you guys. Not a lot of people actually got to go through all that training to become knights.
Most people during the Middle Ages were peasants. Free peasants rented land to farm and owed only their rent to the Lord. Unfree peasants or serfs farmed the Lord's fields and could not leave the Lord's manor.
Most peasants raised crops and tended livestock or farm animals, but every manor also had carpenters, shoemakers, smiths, metalworkers, and other skilled workers. The thing, you guys, that's really cool about living on a manor is they were totally self-sufficient. It was a really, really dangerous time. People couldn't be out traveling about. And so if you lived in and around a manor, like everything you needed to survive was basically made right there for you. So there was no need for you to actually leave.
Along with the work they performed, peasants and serfs might owe the Lord numerous taxes. Most peasants lived in small, simple houses composed of 1 or 2 rooms. An entire family might eat and sleep in one room that sometimes also housed their farm animals.
Yeah, so imagine it might be stinky, but it's also going to help keep you warm. All that body heat and stuff like that coming off the animals was definitely something that might keep you warm on a cold night. All right, you guys, in this lesson, we learned about life during feudal times. The fall of the Roman Empire led to a period of uncertainty and danger, and Europeans developed the system of feudalism to help provide economic and social stability and safety.
Feudalism. The feudal system arose as a way of protecting property and creating stability. It was based on loyalty and personal relationships. Monarchs gave fiefs to lords, their most important vassals. In exchange, vassals promised to supply monarchs with soldiers in war.
All right, monarchs and lords. At the top of the feudal social structure was the monarch. Below the monarch were his vassals, the lords or nobles. Monarchs and nobles oversaw their land and the people who worked on them. Okay, they lived in manor houses or castles.
Knights and peasants. Below the lords were the knights, heavily armored warriors on horseback, who provided service in war in return for land and protection. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were free peasants, followed by serfs. Peasants farmed the land and made most of the necessary articles for life. Serfs were peasants bound to the land.
All right, you guys, so remember there was that guiding question: how well did feudalism establish order in Europe in the Middle Ages? And then don't forget those vocabulary terms:
Charlemagne, chivalry, feudalism, fief, and serf.
All right, you guys, take care.
Bye.